Hello everyone. I'm Sim Otman, the event manager of Architect Hub Qatar. I'm happy to have you all with us today in another Hub Talk with architect Leander Moons to be about sustainable community development, how we as architects can support the empowerment of local communities from a global vision to a local implementation. Let's say, before starting, let me first introduce our colleague Marcia. Marcia will be the moderator for the talk for today. Marcia Arfan Abdul Ghani is an interior architect with art history as a minor from Virginia Commonwealth University. In her discipline, she's also well versed in vernacular architecture, digital and analytical tools, and future urban living. She's currently working as a researcher on sociocultural and economical urban phenomena in Qatar. Thanks, Marcia, for today. Before giving the speech to you, let me remind our colleagues that the talk will be recorded today, and I'll ask from you to just be in mute during the talk. And when the presentation of architect Leander is over, we'll give you the possibility to speak. You can also share your thoughts and your question in the chat, and Marcia will take care of that. So I'm impatient to see the presentation. And voila, Marcia, the floor is yours.
Slim, thank you so much for introducing both of us to this talk. I'm happy to basically moderating for the first time. Thank you, Omeima, for the opportunity, and thank you, Slim, for the introduction. And thank you to our guest, Leander Moons, for agreeing to come on this talk. I hope that we'll have a fruitful discussion and a fruitful introduction of what he's about to say. So just to give a background, my name is Marsha, and I'm basically an interior architect, as Slim said. I came from a background of vernacular architecture, but now I've kind of sort of moved on to research-based discipline, and I'm happy to hear different case studies from different countries and different disciplines of architecture. And here we have Leander Moons, who will be talking about sustainability community development. But a bit about his background is before he establishes his business, he worked for leading architectural offices in Europe, in North America, and also Africa. So he founded his design and project management consultancy called Leander Moons Incorporated in 2019 New York. And then what he does is that he supervised Berlin-based team of Baumschläge, Berlin architects, and the Nairobi office of Baumann architects, and has been leading international consultant teams for complex projects around the globe. He contributed to the realization of numerous projects in different typologies, and his works have received multiple architectural awards, which I hope to be hearing more about. Leander Moons Incorporated OMT Architects GmbH are creating innovative design solution based on local practices and resources, to which he will expand in his presentation in Zanzibar, Tanzania. I look forward to hearing more about your works, Leander Moons. The floor is yours. Happy to hear more from you.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Slim, for the introduction. I'm honored to be here. It's a nice opportunity to share what we are doing. Let me share my screen and get this started. So I hope that works. So as already was noted, we are a very young office, and we just started like our office a year ago. And actually, it was due to this pandemic and everything around it that it was possible to start this. You already heard a bit about my background. I worked in Europe, Africa, and the US, where I'm currently also located in New York. We have another office in Berlin together with my partner here, Andreas Trampe-Kieslich. And we started off like basically with the experience we had working worldwide for bigger offices, doing a lot of projects, winning awards with those projects, but thinking also beyond that, how can we actually contribute to the world of architecture? And we started off small. I came into contact with one of my former clients, and they asked me, can you design a villa? And maybe the villa will be built a couple of times, maybe not just once. So let's build it like in a kind of modular way. And that was easy. I could do that next to my regular job. And it was also an easy, like even though it was on the other side of the world, to remain in contact because we knew each other well. So that went on for a little bit of time, and currently we're doing a lot more than just like little villas. We still do like some private houses, as on the left top. We do like some multifamily houses here in Berlin, just ground broke last week. We do some competitions if we feel like, in the left bottom, competition entry for the German embassy in Botswana. And we do some cool high-rise buildings where I cannot tell quite a lot about. And all of that we do as a regular office, but only with 4 people. We're all 4 in different locations, so we work really Zoom based. Some of so actually one of my team members I never met in person just yet, so we're looking forward to doing that later this week. But that I never thought would be possible like 2 years ago, before COVID came and changed the world. Now we do quite a lot. We have currently around 1,000 units in planning or on construction site, and with 4 people, that's of course quite a lot to cope with. So we see ourselves as a network of people and offices working together, making these things possible. And especially because we feel we have to be innovative in the way we work. We need very specific knowledge, and we get that knowledge through the people we work with. And also all these people are located throughout the world, from North America through Europe and Africa. There where we think the knowledge is available, we contact them and we make it work again, all through Zoom. So of course that is a bit of a challenge, especially then if you have this great location, Fumba Town, where I will talk a bit more about, in Africa. How do you do that only through Zoom? Of course, 2 years ago that would not be possible. Now with people being able to connect, to talk through Zoom, to organize themselves through Zoom, we work with several offices together on design projects through Zoom. That of course is a challenge on one hand, but it's also a big opportunity on the other hand. So in Fumba Town we are exploring that, and this is the location a couple of years ago. So basically the island where it's located, there was nothing except for 2 showroom houses. Now, for those of you who don't know exactly where Zanzibar is an island just in front of the coast of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, in the eastern edge of Africa, so East Africa. And Zanzibar itself is known by most people because of its leisure. It's like a vacation island, a little paradise, but it also has a lot of history. It has been very well connected throughout the history with different parts of the world. It has a World Heritage in the form of Stone Town, the old town. And of course, it also has some dark pages of history. For example, it was one of the last places in the world where slaves were still traded. So Zanzibar is a lot more than only that vacation island as we often know it. At the same time, you know, when we're thinking about like, why would we do projects in Africa? There is so much also in the rest of the world to do. Of course, we have to look also at our world as a whole. We'll see over the next decades to come that the demographic development of the world is very much focused on population growth in Africa. We'll see in Europe, in Russia, Asia, China, the population will actually shrink, but the African population will double in size. So if we think about like how can we really like do something for the world about sustainability, especially, let's start there where the need is the highest. When you look at the numbers these days, you can already see that is very much the case. So we, of course, are working a lot in Tanzania, and there currently the backlog in housing is already 3 million dwellings which are missing, and the population growth in the next years up to 2030 will be another 16 million. Now, if you take that 5 people live on average in a Tanzanian home, you can do the math and you will come to the conclusion that you need around 700,000 dwellings a year. That's far from the reality what is built at the moment. So the challenge there is huge, the demand is huge. How are we going to tackle that? And that, of course, starts partly by like, how are we actually building there? And you will see that, especially in the African context, a lot of the construction is for those people who have a lot of money. And that makes up like 2 to 5% of the population. For the rest of the population, there is fairly little official development. Of course, informal settings are not considered part of those. So if we start doing something there, it all starts not with us architects, it starts with the developer, who has to go away from like best practice and go towards innovation to really deal with the challenges here. And of course, stepping away from innovation means also risking something. It's an opportunity, but it's also a risk. And I will come back to these 4 terms. I often hear, especially in my North American context, there's a lot of architects who talk about best practice and innovation in one sentence. And for me, there's quite the opposite. You cannot do best practice when you want to be innovative. When you're innovative, you're not following best practice. So that is a very important thing, I think, to understand when we talk about the projects here, that this is definitely a cooperation between different people who have a vision, and only with a vision we can make something really possible. When I joined this project many years ago, actually when I was working in Africa, I first encountered this project. There was basically that 2 houses which you've seen before on the location as a show house, and they were built in timber frame, which is a technique, building technique, which is locally rather not used. I actually find it always funny when you refer to Zanzibar, the capital, its cultural heritage part is called Stone Town. So that is their heritage, that's their culture, building in stone. And we are building in timber. Is that going to work? Nobody actually knew. So the houses at the beginning were offered both in timber and in stone, and people could choose. Interestingly, then almost 70% chose a timber house. So it showed that there was a market for new innovation, for new technologies. Based off that, like this was the master plan very early on in the project. There were maybe not so many architects involved at that time. So it was more an engineering project at that time. And when I joined the project for my African firm where I was working at the time at Bowman Associates, we were basically tasked by like, how can we make this a more livable town? How can we bring additional qualities into this than only the row housing? And then we started to develop a master plan where of course, like there were like kind of 3 drivers for that. Like, how can we make a green city? The island is a very green environment. We should not lose that and make best use of that. We want to create a diverse city. In Africa, a lot of the context is that you have enclosed compounds. So it's very segregated in a way, culturally, in terms of your income, just in terms of the physical context, because there's a wall around your complex. So we wanted to break that approach and say this town is like one town and it has one total security boundary, and in that town then people live together and then they start to form a community. So those 3 things were really drivers for also the architectural and urban context we tried to create in in the town. And you actually can see here, this is still like the grid structure, which is still like the principle, of course, for the infrastructure needed for the town. But we really broke up that by implementing central spaces, pedestrian walkways, and going into newer developments. We are also replacing a lot of the infrastructure for cars by actually parks and greenery. So if we look at Fumba Town today, we see that actually that mixture is there. 1,100 units have been completed. People moved in there. Of course, it's a new city, so the green still has to grow, but luckily we're in a tropical context, so it grows pretty fast. And we start to see that like the pedestrian walkway is really becoming a center of the city. Of course, we have high-end living, also through the benefits that brings in terms of finances, supporting like the affordable housing located in the same town. And of course, there's different views, there's different densities related to the apartment sizing and their pricing. So this is Fumba Town today. This was actually in December when it was very dry. I just saw pictures from earlier this month, and it was all green again. So it's amazing how the drought and the rain changed the landscape. And I think it's also a good reminder from us, like how our climate is changing. So currently, a lot of like the bigger buildings here are constructed in a conventional technology. And what we want to do, like going forward, and also seeing the challenges that conventional building technology has, is to think about like how can we enhance this even further than we're already doing that with the portion of the town we built and are constructing at the moment. So we want to make the town more vibrant, more sustainable, and especially also more equitable, because affordable not always means equitable. I'll come to that in a moment. So here is the plan already a bit farther developed. And what I will talk about is some developments on this side of the town, and a development here on the top where I will zoom into a bit more. Do note that this whole eastern portion here, it's actually the south because the plan is north to the left, is not built yet. So the town is also an evolving process. We're developing this and changing it as we go, also with the feedback we get from the people. And I think that is one of the other very important items when we think about like how can we create communities. We also have to listen to these communities and then act on that. A lot of like city development is of course done in a way that there is a general master plan and then spots are being filled in, and there's very little we can do about the general master plan anymore because there's too many players involved. And I think that is what sets our development here really apart, is that we keep questioning, keep changing, keep adding to this. So going a bit into this project. So this project is called Bustani Villas. That's a high-end project. And here we are trying to really reduce the infrastructure for the car. So we introduce like cul-de-sacs, like dead-end street, where you can reach all the houses, which can be used by the families as an extension of their garden. And they will also have like direct access to a park in the center of that. Very different than the first approaches where there was a street between all the houses and the front yards were used for car parking. Then we have the Moyoni project, which is very much centered around the community. So this is like more affordable housing, where we would talk by a villa around prices like 200 to 300,000 per villa. Here, a house would cost around 60 to 70,000. So that's a different price class. Of course, what we think in certain parts of the world as affordable is not always as affordable in the local context. So it is a very cheap housing. It's difficult already to get to that point, but to really get to the local markets, we have to make another step. But still here, this is a very important project to take that last step, because here we tried out some new technologies. I will come to that in a moment. And then the last project and the most recent project we launched is the Cheche project. And that really then sets the bar to lower that threshold to really allow local people to afford to buy an apartment there. And apartments here start around $12,000. They go up quite a bit to around 70 to 80,000, but it's exactly that flexibility and that diversity we create through this, which makes this project one of a kind in this context. So go back one step. Boostani, we started to build in conventional methods, concrete, brickwork, and we run into issues with sand supply. That is kind of a contradictory to the location and island, but Zanzibar is made on coral. There is some sand, but it's very limited. So getting concrete mixed on site is difficult. Of course, also the footprint of that concrete is pretty high. So I've been looking into what are actually the alternatives and how can we use those for different projects. And there, we're going to have to zoom out a little bit. Looking at the world, we all know the Amazonas, Brazil is very forest rich. We know that in Europe, like the timber industry is large, the same as in North America. But Africa actually has the highest density of forests if you look per person on the world. So why are we not using that resource in this context? Especially then when we look to, and now we come back to this opportunity and risk, the large opportunity lies in our climate, in what we need to do to make our global warming keep at bay. I mean, I don't think we can stop it, but at least we can try to do better. And there, of course, like engineered wood is a much better, much more sustainable approach than using concrete or steel. So taking that together, it's clear that like through innovative use of timber, there's a huge opportunity to develop housing in this context with making use of those resources. And here we're back at this Moyoni project about the community, but also about the timber. Currently, those are on site, are being constructed, and I'm always amazed when I look at the pictures, actually how clean the construction site looks like if you compare that to the conventional construction site. A lot of these timber components we can pre-manufacture, put them together on site with limited like additional labor, but also with limited addition of dust, the humidity of the concrete, especially in the tropical climate, always is an issue for newly built houses. So we all emit that from the site, and we have a very clean and very high quality finishes for these houses when we complete them. So with the knowledge we gained through this first approach on building with timber, we developed a number of other projects. Vizazi project is one of those. This project will be completely done in cross-laminated timber technology. So there's a lot of different kinds of timber technologies. Wood frame is the most simple. CLT, cross-laminated timber, is probably the most advanced. So this can be only done for higher end housing because the premium in terms of pricing is higher. But for us, it was again very important to make that experience, to see how can we use those means also for other projects. How can we optimize based on the characteristics? And that's where we come then to GmbH Living. And GmbH Living is really like taking the lessons learned from these other projects. There are a couple more timber projects we're developing. Also, the developer has, with other architects, developed timber products. And also there's a local company who is like working closely together with us to inform us like what can we source locally, how can we make best use of these resources and materials to create our projects. And the brief here was like, how can we make the houses so affordable, so as equitable as possible, but also as flexible as possible. So we started actually off with not knowing how this project is going to look like. We started off with basically some design criteria, which like we had to find a form for. So what we wanted to do is say we can basically create everything from a studio apartment around 10 to 15 square meters up to a 3-bedroom apartment, or even further thinking that like as a shared living condition, which is not pictured here. So how could that all work together? We looked at just the simple form of a house, like how would we do it when we would just build a simple form? And we started to determine like what then in that form would be which components. So we know that, for example, in the context, the humid climate, the hot climate, and then combining that with affordable, equitable housing, that the problem in timber always occurs in the wet areas, the bathroom. So if we think about like where would we like apply conventional building methods, that would be the bathrooms. It would be the emergency staircase because of fire requirements. So that was kind of given. Okay, we use that only for that, and of course for the ground floor slab. And then on top of that, let's explore what we can do with timber. So I already talked about timber frame. We work together with the factory on Zanzibar, who develops like the timber framing. Like what actually is the dimensions we can work with? How can we optimize that? How big can our windows be to really like minimize the amount of material we need to use? So everything we did is basically based on the 2x5-inch timber studs, which is the local general or material you can get. Bigger than that is more difficult, it's more expensive. Smaller than that has like a structural issue because like it doesn't transport the forces as we need it. And with that, we even thought further, like how can we do actually the ceilings? We have worked with CLT, cross-laminated timber, but that is a factory-produced product, which can only be produced at the moment in Europe and North America. There are some initiatives in I think South Africa has a plant which comes up at the moment, but it's still very limited, and there's a lot of knowledge involved with it, and we want to empower the local community, the local workers, so that the investment we do here doesn't like leave the country, but really goes back to the people who then can buy with the money they earn their houses there. So we came up with actually, like I call it low-tech CLT. When I tell that, my structural engineer always like say I cannot say that, but it works in a similar way. It's nailed timber beams basically, which are nailed together or doweled together. There are different techniques, and we're like trying those different ones out, and then we apply a little layer of concrete on top because we anyway need the tiled floor there, and that works together as a much more optimized slab as a concrete slab would do, and it again makes use of these 2x5-inch timber boards as the main material. So any local carpentry can basically prepare portions of these ceilings, deliver them on site, and we can implement them and build the building out of it. Of course, there's then requirements on spans, so we optimize the span to really allow for the 2x5 studs, and based on that we then created like the apartment typologies. So we started with that single building, and then of course we were thinking like, okay, when we have a single building, just 8 units around that on the staircase, that won't bring us into the realm where we need to be in terms of affordability and equitability. So we have to transform like that volume to make a bigger building out of it with more units in it. And we did that by combining that and integrating a portico to the building. The interesting thing, what happened through that is that now when we had that layout and we basically kept all the interior free of any load-bearing structures, we could start applying these different sizes of apartments, different uses of space to the volume. So you start to see here in the different colors that we can have like very small shops, and the shops we are integrating at the back side of the building, and the apartments are to the front. Now the question is, of course, what is front and back in this? We'll come to that when I talk about the urban setting here. But we can go from a very small shop to a bigger shop. You can also combine two bigger shops to make an even bigger shop. You can combine studio apartments, which are located on the other side, with a shop to make either an apartment or a bigger shop. So all of a sudden we have a lot of options. We drawn up 64. We stopped there. We could draw even more because we would not even be able to include all of those in the sales documentation. In the end, I think we're selling around like 24 options, but still I think that's quite a bit for a building which looks very simple to start with, and of course that was also the intention. And through that, by using every time similar approaches, so you see that all the bathrooms have a similar layout, the cores they create are the structural stiffness for the building, and then we create like similar spans in between. And those again allow by the flexible placement of like the compartment walls between the apartments for 2-bedroom apartments, 1-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartments, and shared living conditions where extended family, student housing, all kinds of different means of living can also be integrated. Apart from that, there were, of course, a couple of other design criteria we integrated in this, knowing that it's affordable housing. There will not be an AC standardly built in, so cross ventilation, of course, very important. Also, getting a cold floor in there in the hot, humid climate is important. So that brought us to the tiles, and that informed also like the buildup of the floor, because we needed screed anyway for the tiles. So why not use the screed also in a structural way by combining it as a composite ceiling with the nailed timber ceilings. And so in that sense, we really try to optimize everything. Of course, one of the things we should never take for granted, and especially have to very carefully design around, especially when we talk about timber, is fire life safety. Timber, of course, is a combustible material. So it's important that the fire life safety concept supports the designs, even when they're optimized to the maximum to create affordable and equitable housing. So we work together there with a company called Ignis in Zurich. They are like a spin-off of the ETH, the university in Zurich, who do a lot of research into timber applications in construction, and they also inform authorities in their coding for timber buildings, which is not very well advanced at the world at the moment, because timber has not been used in the engineered way for a long time, as we're currently like exploring this, and that is already true in well advanced countries. So you can imagine in Tanzania, where the building code is really old, has not been updated, is kind of like using different codes to relate to. Building with timber is not as straightforward. So we have to also inform that process with the authorities on how to really make this possible. And we as architects, of course, have the interest that the building is as safe as possible. So based on all this, and it's actually interesting because at the moment we are working on this project, so a lot of this is really like also content we created last week, and it's an evolving process. But based on all this, what we know, and also what we've seen through the sales of these houses, which started the end of last year, it's like, how can we now implement this in a way? How would we apply these building materials to the building? So here you see like the layout there, and we start to mix and match between the different building techniques. So I already told about like the timber frame walls. So those will form much of the outside of the building, the envelope, so to say. Then when we were looking into like the fire life safety of the building, the timber frame like does allow for that, but we need a lot of additional material, a lot like less sustainable in that sense, by applying additional gypsum layers to it. And also there, of course, the question always arises, how will that be used over time? People can open that up, then the fire proofing is affected by that. So using the mass timber, the CLT, the cross-laminated timber, which is basically a mass timber product. It's massive layers of timber glued together. Of course, gives us that fire rating as well. And on top of that, we don't have to worry about like people making a hole in that wall because it's massive timber. It also allows us a better acoustical performance of these walls than the timber frame will have. On the other hand, it's more expensive. So we definitely don't want to use this for the whole building because then again our pricing for the houses go up. So we use the CLT there where we need it most as the compartment walls in between the building volumes, and also to support like the slabs which create the ceilings. In addition to that, and those are ongoing discussions, actually interesting to see it's like how do we like optimize then our span. So like 375 is around the maximum span we can do with one of these like nil timber ceilings. So we need support in between, and we can either go to a glue laminated, again that is like a kind of CLT. CLT is cross laminated, so it can load bear in multiple directions. Glue laminated goes only in one direction, so you can only make beams and columns by that. With CLT, you can make like whole slabs because they go in different directions. So we can now create a structure which is like created out of glue laminated and cross laminated timber. We can hang the ceilings in between, and then we can fill up the facades with the timber frame. And that really brings us into a situation where we made best use of all the characteristics of the material to create this building, and of course that also is reflected in the price. So then going into actually those apartments, this is basically showing what currently is the apartment mix for sale. So we see here in the bottom, those are the ground floor apartments. So we had this very small little duka, it's called, is shop. So it just has a little shop here, like because of the climate, a lot of this actually sales take place on the outside. So it's more like a storage room where they then put their merchandise outside once needed. They have a little back room which has connections. They could use it as a bathroom, but they can also just use it as a toilet, or they can build in a small kitchen. That we leave completely open to those who start to occupy these units. Then we have bigger units also around the corner, and then we have studio apartments here, also again in different sizes. So the studio apartment always has that one bathroom, a kitchen to one side, and then studio to the other side. Of course, there, you know, how you want to do your interior design there is up to those living there. But of course, there we gave some options as well. Then going to these units here. So this is our standard 2-bedroom layout. Again, we have like a little living room. We have 2 bedrooms.
Hi, Leander.
Yes.
I'd just like to keep in mind of the time. I think it's great that you've basically your presentation is about sustainable community development. I think we should avoid the details to this. Yes. And basically try to relate back to why your decisions connect back to the sustainable community development. For example, you've highlighted the workforce involvement, you've highlighted the resources that were available. You've also talked about how the programs enhance social cohesion. I think we would avoid talking about details and try to move on towards something more tying into the sustainable community development. If you could go back to that, if that's possible.
Yeah, that is also why I think it's important to go through this. So I wanted to come to that because, of course, like social cohesion and diversity, of course, like occurs only when we can create different solutions. So the solution here, like and I won't go then through all the detail of like how this is laid out, but it all starts with not building a building with only one typology. If we build a building with only one typology, we have like similar people living there. So our interest was, of course, and that's like reflected here in the left bottom, is that when we have very different apartments going from a studio size apartment where like a couple might live, a person alone might live, to like a family apartment or like a shared living apartment where 3 families together with their parents, with their grandparents, with all their children will live in one building. That is like also adding to how we can create diverse communities. So that for us is a very important part of how we design these communities. So making sure that that building is flexible and can accommodate apartments in different like layouts and different sizes is key to achieving that community. So let me go to actually how this then comes together in the site plan. We have seen that that building has like 2 sides, a front and a back, or a back and a front, however you want to call it. We don't want to really call it back or front. We say one side is more like the community, it's the residential side of the building, and the other side becomes the more commercial side of the building. Of course, there's like some initial challenges there to overcome in the context here where residential units are accessed from a secured parameter. So how do we make sure that like we can combine commercial aspects and residential aspects into one project? And that's why we have located this project to the edge of the town, where we have like a main road, which is a public land. And then the town itself, as I noted before, has this security parameter. So by the arrangement of the building, we allow like the commercial to become part of the town. It becomes like a kind of signage to the street where you can see here, here are shops, here, this is Fumba Town, the bazaar of that. At the same time, we create through these courtyards quiet and secure living courtyards where the community can access their buildings from the courtyard. So there will be a barrier basically in between those buildings. There is some access allowed directly from the town into the bazaar, but all of these things have to be thought through as well, because a community won't come by itself. Especially in Africa, like communities are very like depending on their social network. So if we create a new town, how can we make sure that that network is again reflected in our buildings? And that comes through the diverse layout of the building and allowing for that diversity, as complex as that might be in planning it, because it's much easier, of course, to make one building only 2-bedroom buildings, one building only 1-bedroom buildings or units. We try to really break that, and every building should make or allow for everything basically. And then how are we mixing and matching that when we start to sell it? And the second layer to that is really then the urban context. How do we make sure that the back doesn't feel like a back, but gets used differently by commercial in this instance? Now, there are some buildings, of course, which are then related to the town. So there we replace the commercial portion, either by additional studio apartments, or we stick through a bigger apartment, and they have like then their rooms to the other side. So again, there we can be very flexible in how we address like the different layouts of the building in the different contexts. And I think that is also the key for development like this. So we've started sales here last year. I mentioned that before, and we've seen that demand is really high. I think the ground floor is almost completely sold out. All the smaller units go, of course, very well because they are also the cheapest units. But it shows that there is large demand in the local community for projects like this, and we have been already got inquiries to develop similar concepts for different locations. So it's really that integrated approach, which is not only about like an urban setting, it's really like throughout the process, and it has to go also into the detail, because only through the detail we can then accommodate the price needed to make this successful. And this is like just the image, and just being aware of time, closing off here. This is how this will be looking like in hopefully around like 1 or 2 years from now. So we intend to start building these buildings later this year. And because of the technology, again, making use of timber, prefabrication a lot, also construction is a lot faster than conventional building methods. Of course, again, that adds to when people commit to making an investment and then have to wait a couple of years until their house is ready, again, like increases that threshold. So all these elements have to play together to really make an impact here and make this this viable and accessible for the local communities. Now, just a little look out. I know I cannot tell too much about this, but we're taking this even further than that. We are really exploring what can we do with timber. Can we build a high-rise with that? Can we build a high-rise in Africa there? Don't know, probably yes. So we'll see about that. Maybe one other time I can tell more about this project. But that's it for my presentation. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing questions, have a discussion about this, and I would like to hand it back to you, Marcia.
Thank you so much, Leander, for targeting so many factors in just one presentation. I think, in my opinion, you've highlighted multiple factors that makes a sustainable community. I think the word sustainability has been overused time and time again, but we all know it's a holistic process that involves multiple things. You've highlighted the programs, you've highlighted the expected circulations and interactions between people. You've also highlighted the engineering process. You've highlighted the economical aspect. I think what I'd like to raise a question from our attendees. Omeima is asking that it seems that a part of sustainability and empowerment of the local community is also to make it affordable. Again, back to the economical aspect. How much has cost been challenged in delivering a sustainable design? I think you've sort of put things together, and but I think let's try to basically create like a comprehensive understanding on how you're able to maintain the costs at the same time opening the market for a lot of the community to purchase or invest in this property development.
Yeah, I think that's a super important question, because this whole starts. I mean, if we build something which the community cannot afford, it doesn't benefit them. And of course, on the other hand, we see that we are working with innovative new materials in a context where they haven't been used. So for me, Fumba Town is almost like a laboratory of that. Like how can we use projects, especially the higher end projects where we have like more cost, of course, which we can apply to explore optimizing like the approaches there, to take that and then apply that to really make buildings which are focused on the local market more affordable. So in general in Fumba Town, and I think that was also an experience throughout like the construction process, there was a lot of foreign interest in that. I mean, I told before Zanzibar is like a vacation island. Who wouldn't want to have a house there? But again, there it's also thanks to the developer that we always have been saying like, okay, but like what we're doing here, even when we're selling that abroad, we should make sure that we start developing projects based on the experience, which are also really benefiting the local community. And they have like always made sure that the local community was very much involved in the process. So the first buildings, although bought mainly by foreigners, the local community was empowered by them because like they were being paid, they were working on the site. There's this great story that fishermen there were taken into like the construction company. They were educated how to make tiling, and now they do the tiling for all these apartments. So things like that, of course, like including the community into these developments is key of its success, and therefore it was very important, and also the reason why I highlighted the Cheche project, because that is the first project where we see that the majority of the buildings is actually bought by local people and not by foreign people, and I think that is like key of that we're on the right way here. We're not there yet, by far not. You heard the numbers we have to accommodate, but at least we're finding solutions through this technology which are not only sustainable but also really benefiting the community.
Before I move on to Feriel's question, I think you've highlighted a very important factor here. The market is solely focused on the local community. Are foreigners allowed to purchase as well?
Yes. So of course, you know, when you start to build a new town, there's a lot of upfront like infrastructure and so on you have to make, and I think also learning from the African experience, like there were a lot of like new towns like started, and a lot of them didn't work out because like of the social cohesion in the society. People would not move there when their neighbors would not move there. Where would their kid go when they had to go to work? How would that all work like? So what we need to understand is that we need, when we start to build a new city, we need first like people with more money to invest in that. And the big benefit of Fumba Town is that foreigners are allowed to own a property there. Which is like, I think the first location in Zanzibar where that's the case. But that also opened a lot of opportunities to start develop the city and make also that development more focused on the local community on the long term, not on the very first short term, but you see at the same time there's a lot of like other developments in East Africa, but throughout the rest of Africa as well, where they focus on return of investment on certain layers of the society, which are really not interested in moving there. So all of this, you mentioned it, a holistic approach is super important in that, and making best use of the possibilities is that as well.
One last question for me before moving on to the other questions. Has any government policies intervened in any way? Because I know certain countries you are required to present a certain amount of quota for the local investors, and then the rest can be freehold ownership. Yes, has any sort of part of government policies involved in it throughout the development of the project, sometimes even workforce quota sometimes?
Yeah, I don't know if there's exact quotas by the local governments, but of course for us again it's key to work together with the local government. We don't want to do this without their knowledge, so they are integrated part of like what we're doing here. We also like connect with them, and of course that's mainly the developer. There as architects also with our location we're a bit less involved with that, but working together with the authorities, also hearing what they need. This town, this development has started as like a town development to support Zanzibar city, which is rapidly growing like the rest of Africa. So there's a big shortage of housing, and of course like they supported this development because it can like bring relief to the high demand in Zanzibar city. So we're just like 15 minutes away from the airport here. The airport is at just the edge of the city, so it's very close by. And of course that's also why we have interest in developing affordable solutions where local people can actually move to it. I'm always amazed when I go to the site. You start to see that around the town a lot of people are starting to build their houses and their little businesses, and for me that is the best sign I think you can get when people want to be close to actually what you're doing. It shows that the people know it, that they're interested in that, and that they even find it attractive to move there.
Thank you so much. Farial is asking, tell me if I've understood your questions correctly. She is saying that the true local timber in Zanzibar is just coconut wood, which is not suitable because it warps around, and which local materials were used combined to the CLT in the facade. What is the redefinition of the built environment of these projects in terms of materials? Tell me if I'm understanding it correctly, Farial. I think she's trying to, am I correct that you're trying to understand the imported wood in comparison to the natural wood that exists in Zanzibar? Farial, are you there?
I can otherwise answer part of that question. So it's right on Zanzibar itself. There is of course much less wood production as such. So the beams we were talking about, the 2x5 studs, that's softwood, pine wood coming from the mainland. But for us already, like sourcing wood locally from Tanzania is way better than shipping that from Northern Europe or other parts of the world to Africa. Just the transportation distances are different. And again, we see, like, of course, East Africa as a region, as a local region where when we want to develop something, that empowerment should happen in the region and not like on parts of the world where you know, that additional benefit is not necessarily required. We don't need to make Europe richer than it already is, or North America. When we build something in Africa, it should be built and for African people, and that's why already it's important to source from the mainland. Although, of course, on Zanzibar, if Zanzibar has very wealthy surrounding, a lot of spices and other things they grow there, but construction wood is unfortunately not one of those. And then going to the materials, maybe shortly, of course, what we try to use is as many like locally produced products as possible. At the same time, we're looking at like the sustainable footprint, but sometimes a product locally sourced might be a bit less sustainable than maybe something which is like produced in the Middle East, in China or in Europe, but through transport, you know, that cancels out, and then we rather would choose for the locally produced product over the imported product.
Locally produced, but the resources may be from abroad. Is that what you're saying? It's locally manufactured, but the source is abroad. Well,
the resource, not necessarily. So some products, for example, if we look at gypsum board, like with of course with timber stud walls, we need gypsum board to finish it. We need OSB. So OSB unfortunately is not produced in the area. So that's something we need to import. There is gypsum produced locally that might not be the most sustainable like version of gypsum. That might be somewhere else, but it is more sustainable if you include the transportation cost into that, and again also the empowerment of the local economy there is of importance. So it always is a bit of a give and take. Of course, what comes to that is the large demand and the limited availability of construction companies. So we always have to juggle, and again that is more the developer, of course, than the architect. Like, do we like want to speed up the building process? Do we want to source locally? Do we want to source the most sustainable? So this is always like a balance we need to find.
So there are two questions about landscaping. One person said Slim is asking, what is done to protect the existing trees and plants? Do you incorporate that into your landscape, or do you import or create a new landscape? The second one may relate because Omeima is asking that is permaculture is a big part of life in Fumba Town. Was it part of the architectural design brief in any way?
Yes, both. Yes, and I'll explain a little bit more. So, as you can see on this image, a lot of like the actual planting on the site is fairly low. So it's a lot of bushes and shrubs. When there are trees, we definitely keep them as much as we can. Those which are not kept for certain reasons, they are being replaced. So actually that's not visible on this view, but just to the left of the town, there's a called service center with a nursery where plants are grown. So people who buy a house here, they can buy their plants from there, which are nursed from the plants which are taken from the site, and then replanted them back in the gardens of the people moving in. And the same is true when we think about permaculture, that the principles are applied here to 100%. For example, through the waste management. So there's a central waste management for the whole city, where the waste is brought again to the service center, where it's being filtered through chickens actually. So the eggs are again sold, but the chickens do their work, and what is left, I think 95% of the waste is recycled into soil, and that soil is again used for the new houses to fertilize the ground together with the plants who are built in and grown in the nursery. So there is a complete circular system in place where that permaculture aspect and the sustainable aspect play a very important role. And the way we like play into that as architects is thinking about, for example, what do we do with our stormwater? How can we slow down the stormwater? How can we harvest the stormwater? How can we use it then to irrigate the planting? It's actually also why I had this image open here. If you can see, like everything is super dry, but the portion of the city which is built and inhabited, you see how green it is, and that's because of these means which are integrated in the structural and infrastructural approach of the city, and that of course is also expanded on all the new projects to come.
I love what you're saying about including multiple stakeholders, not necessarily big entities, but we're talking about local communities and local businesses. And you use the word circular, which is very important. That's something, a vocabulary that's being thrown around a lot. Now we're starting to talk about circular economy. What does that entail? And you basically highlighted multiple factors that basically create this circle loop of a circular economy or sustainable development. Another question about material attribute, acoustic isolation. Does wood give quite a good isolation between different spaces?
Yes, that is of course like the acoustics together with fireproofing is a big topic with timber, especially if you come like from the experience of concrete. Of course, acoustics is achieved by mass. The more building mass you have, the better your acoustics are. So let me shortly go back. There's a couple of things we can do. We go to that one slide. So for example, what we are doing is that we are disengaging the walls from each other. So basically, we have two walls next to each other, and therefore we minimize like the acoustical effect between the apartments. But in the end, the acoustics is of course something where like we see a difference between high-end housing and affordable and equitable housing. And I think that's a discussion going on in the whole world, like what is the acoustical requirement for housing? And for example, in Europe, but also in my context in New York, this is a very contradictory discussion at times, because of course people want to have a quiet home. At the other hand, we see that houses are becoming so expensive because our requirements in terms of acoustics are especially very high. So we take the acoustic requirements also very much in relation to the project. So the higher end projects, of course, have a higher acoustical grade. They have a bigger build up for the floor, and therefore like the volume grows. So they have a slightly better performance. Here we try to add, for example, like the topping slab on top of like the nail timber slab. We increase slightly to enhance the acoustical performance. But the downside, of course, from like the region where people used to have tiled floors, and which is also convenient because it's a cool floor in a hot climate. So that is a nice feature to have. But of course, also that impacts again the acoustical performance of ceilings. So that is again a balance where we as architects, of course, together with the clients, always have to balance the costs, the living quality, and the opportunities there in relation to the building material and the eventual project. But yeah, acoustics is definitely one where the timber is performing, of course, not on the same standard as the concrete is. On the other hand, like especially the CLT is a very massive project. It has a higher density. That's also why, for example, here we choose for the compartment walls that higher density of the CLT over the timber frame, where of course the timber frame would have like a lesser performance than the CLT does here. So again, it's all about optimizing and bringing these things in the right balance.
Quick question, which building codes are you using?
Good question.
A very quick question.
No, that's
quick, but it's always a question that can be confusing once you practice abroad.
Yes. So basically, Tanzania has its own codes, and their codes are based on the British standard. They recently also adapting a lot of the IBC, the International Building Code, to it. So the US standard. But the problem is with timber buildings that none of these codes completely covers timber buildings to a full extent. And that's what I mentioned before, where we're working together with consultants who, for example, also support the British government in rewriting their code. And we have engaged here with the National Construction Council to actually discuss with them, like, how are we implementing timber coding into the Tanzanian code, and we are on the track with them where they already have been very open to discuss this, because of course they see also the benefit this could be. I mean, there is a lot of forestry around currently. Trees are just chopped down and the raw materials shipped to China. Does of course not add any value locally to it. And by supporting timber developments, of course, the code requirements are integrated part of those discussions, and also how we can enhance an industry to be built up based on that. Also relies on, can we use that product then on the market? If there's no code describing that, it's fairly difficult. So the quick question is not an easy one to answer, but basically for every project, again, we have to redefine what is covered by the codes which apply locally and what is beyond that, which we have to address them with the local authorities.
Thank you so much, Leander. Just one more question to conclude all this. We're happy to have you on board, to be our guest for today. One last question. I think the last takeaway from this is trying to understand your experiences in opening a firm during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's a quite general question, but I think it's very crucial for us to understand because it sort of paves the way of how we work in the future, because it has opened so many doors and methods on how we work as specialists. If you can elaborate your experiences, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that all started, of course, with me being in such a like yeah, in a position. I mean I've been able to work on 3 continents and in offices work on 4 continents. Of course, that experience was key in being able to do this. As I think you mentioned in your introduction, I was doing large complex projects from the US, based in Asia, from Europe, throughout Europe, and the experience there was, of course, always like you have to go there, meet with the people. So before the pandemic, I was on planes so much. And you always question, like, could we not have done this differently? The whole like allowance, like how do you deal with different time zones? So I did a project, for example, in Thailand from New York, with consultants in Australia and in Dubai. So we had basically all the timelines or all the time zones covered. So we could never meet as a team as a whole, only in person. So taking from that experience, also seeing already like that more and more meetings were going to Zoom, or to other web-based platforms. The pandemic, I think, really like gave that additional speed, especially in the African context. I think a lot of people are very used to doing things personal, face-to-face. And I think doing this to the extent we're doing now would not have been possible without the pandemic, because like the pandemic forced people to look into Zoom and also accept it as an outcome of that. And I think one of the big challenges as an office is like, how can you make sure, I don't know if you have that around the world, but in New York, everybody is talking about Zoom fatigue. People get fed up with being constantly on Zoom from meeting to meeting. So you have to find efficient means of doing it. And we tried out different platforms, and I love Zoom because of the annotation function. I think for us architects, annotation on Zoom, that I can just take this pen and write on the plan here, which we have on the screen, is so much more effective than actually taking a sketch roll and sketch something on the table where nobody can actually see what you're actually sketching until it's done. So there also, I think the tools are an opportunity in a way. Of course, they can never replace like the creative process and the face-to-face contact, the meetings and the discussions you have on the side of presentations. But yeah, I am amazed actually, and I would have never thought like to be at this point 3 years ago. I would have never thought that I would hire somebody through Zoom, work together with people through Zoom, seeing them maybe once a year. It's incredible, but at the same time, it does work, and I think that is yeah, that's a great thing to experience and to also learn from. I'm curious to see where this will go once the pandemic is over, hopefully soon. I'm sure a lot more will be done through these Zoom channels, and I think especially we architects have to find ways of doing that. For one of the projects, we're now working with architect teams on 3 continents on one project, in 3 very different time zones, and it works. And yeah, it's a really great experience. It has its challenges, of course. It also starts with having people like working for one company around the world, just like from an administrative point of view, that's pretty difficult to manage, because our like setups in the world are not really supporting that. Yeah, so there are challenges to overcome, but the challenges are more on the administrational side and less on actually the working side.
Thank you so much for your valuable experience summed up in an hour. I hope everybody is content with today's talk. I'd like to conclude and close the floor and hand it over to Slim. Slim, if you'd like to conclude this talk further let me know. Thank you so much, Leander. Thank you so much, everyone, for the questions. Anything else from?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leander. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks for all the attendees for your wonderful question in the chat. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can.
Thanks all for your time and hope to catch you soon in other events. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.